guys, and welcome back to another digital painting tutorial on Procreate. Today we're going to do a magic forest. Welcome to my channel, Creatively Me with Bree, and you guessed it, I'm Bree. On the layer provided, we are going to select a color and drop it in. I wanted to go with a bluish forest, so I picked a color that is already in my color palette, and I just slid the scale to be more blue. Once I have that down, on a new layer, I grab a new color, which I do end up changing, but we'll work with it, right? So I pick a medium blue. Once I have my color established, I go into brushes under airbrush. Technically, any brush in the airbrush library will do, but that's the brush I went with. And then I select an even brighter and like I would say more, it has more violet in it. And I really liked that blue, and I decided to make the center more of that color, just lighter. And then I go into Gaussian blur pool, and that will be our back source of light. Next, on a new layer, I am going to select a different color. I wanted to have a bit more green to it, so I would call this like mint. Reminds me of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Anybody else like mint chocolate chip, or is that just me? I know it's an acquired taste. It's not for everyone. I get it. I also go in and I choose a very dark, like navy blue, and tap it in around the corners where we will have some of the darker elements. Once I have this down, you guessed it, go back into Gaussian blur, and there we go. Now that I'm happy with these layers, I am going to pinch them together so that they are combined as one. On a new layer, I'm going to select the color orange and then move it down quite a bit into the brown colored region because I want this to be the base color of our tree log. And I'm going to go into drawing and grab the black burn brush. I just like the texture of the outside edges. I fill this layer by dragging the color selected on the upper right hand side and dragging it to the space between the two parallel lines that I made. Now I use the selection tool to readjust where the log is resting so that it is more compositionally sound and aesthetic. On a new layer, I'm going to place down a pretty dark green, and that's going to act as our foreground. And then I take the selection tool and I use freeform to grab certain parts, and then I feather, so that I can adjust the color to be just a little bit darker. Once I'm satisfied with the way it looks, I go and I add a layer, and then I click on the background, I hold down, and that is how I select that color. I go down to charcoal brushes and I select the burnt tree so that I can get some texture. I do take down the opacity, and then I just gently tap in the texture. A closer look, I also grab the different colors that are already there, so that darker green and then also the like forest green there. I then go into my brushes and I grab leatherwood. If you guys have seen some of my other tutorials, you'll know that I really enjoy leatherwood for certain textures. I'm going to go into the smudge tool, which I call it blending, and I'm going to blend or smudge the colors so that it's not so sharp and doesn't stand out too much, but also helps keep that texture because we do want it to not be flat, right? We don't want a flat forest. We want it to have texture and some realism to it, even though it is a magical forest and not a real forest. I do want to take a moment to apologize because I zoom in and zoom out a lot. I've tried editing as much as I can out of it, but you're going to have to bear with me a little bit. Next, we're going to go to the log, and I'm going to put it on alpha lock. Sorry for the extreme light difference. We're having storms here today, and the clouds and weather are just all over the place. Okay, so now that we have alpha lock on, I am going to pick a secondary color that I'm going to add to the tree log. We're going to add the shadow on the underside, so I chose a slightly darker brown. I'm using the burnt tree brush again, just to add in some texture. Once I have this texture down, I am going to go in and add another slightly darker color. And I'm going to switch to the brush Leatherwood under Artistic. I do end up adding it as a layer and making it a clipping mask, so that way if I don't like it, I can change it. So I just tap it on there. It does not have to be perfect. I need it to be spaced out though. And I do use various colors throughout, so that way there's like a gradient happening, because the tree would not be one or two colors, it would be a multitude of colors. And once I have that down, I do go into the smudge tool and I use Leatherwood, because Leatherwood does a great job of keeping the texture like integrity. It's not perfect, but it does help keep a lot of the texture without getting rid of it. I like those layers, so I combined them. You don't have to combine your layers as much as I'm doing this. It's just so that way I have enough space to work. But I truly recommend not doing that if you can help it. Don't merge unless you're absolutely certain, because then it is harder to correct things later. Right now on a separate layer, because I am no longer on the alpha lock layer, I am just painting along the edge of the tree, because I want to create that texture that we'd see from bark and now moss. So I'm just getting, just tapping it in there, just trying to get some of that moss and bark established. Obviously the lines are very, very sharp right now and very distinct. We will be correcting that very shortly. I'm going back in with some of the browns just to lighten up some of the areas so it's not so intense. But then when I go in with the smudge tool using the Leatherwood again, it will soften it up and make it so that it's much more subtle. Again, I did that simply for being able to work more easily, but I don't recommend doing this for your projects. Just don't. I ended up having to correct things later that I was like, why did I combine these? So now I'm going to go back into the charcoal and I'm going to choose the second brush from the top right above Burnt Tree. I cannot see my text right now as I'm editing, so just bear with me. And I don't have my iPad near me. But I'm just wiggling some lines to create some shadow for some depth in between the bark. It will not stay looking like this. It will be more subtle, but I'm just getting the lines down first. And I wasn't happy with some of the lines, so I just erased them. Then I'm going to go into blending modes, and I end up selecting Pin Light. Surprise to you and me both. And once I have that established, I do go in and I use the smudge tool just to lighten up any of the areas that are really thick and stand out too much. Now I'm just adding a little bit more shadow on a new layer underneath the lines that we just drew to stand in as the bark, but above the layer that is the actual tree log itself. And I take down the opacity and then I pinch those layers together. And you know what? I'm going to remind you guys, don't do that if you don't have to. Just don't do it. Okay? Next, I'm going to go into artistic brushes. I'm going to grab the Terra Lea, and now I'm going to work on the underside, and I'm using one of the blues from the background, and I end up taking it off clipping mask because I actually want some of the texture to come like off of the actual log itself. I don't want it to just be isolated to the underside of the log. And then I'm going to smudge using the Aurora brush, and it's a slightly altered Aurora brush. It's essentially the regular one, and we're just changing the jitter and the spacing, and that's it. So that's what brush we're using to smudge some of these details. If you haven't subscribed yet, hi, please do. If you have any questions, suggestions on other content you'd like to see, feel free to put it in the comment section. I'd love to hear from you guys about it. and I'm just working it in. And as it's creating this blended effect, it is starting to show up as backlighting because the tree would have some additional colors coming through that are bouncing off the surface underneath it. Now I'm going to go into the hearts brush, and using a very bright yellow, I am just going to go in there and put down my strokes that sort of look like bark again, but I'm also going to add a very bright green. It's not going to look good yet. It's not. It's going to look really awful, guys. Just bear with me through this. I swear it gets better. I do some color adjustments in a moment as well. I'm just really, I promise, just, okay, leatherwood, smudge. Let's smudge it up. Let's make this bearable to look at. I don't know how I went so wrong with these colors here, other than not pre-planning the color palette, obviously, but okay, here we go. Into adjustments. I'm going to make them different colors. There we go. I think that's much better. Less lemon, more lime, if you know what I mean. And now I'm just adding in some subtle moss colors here and there, trying to bring down some of the intensity of what I just added there. I do think it works by the end. It's a little rough on the eye initially, I know. Isn't that all painting though? I feel like there's parts of painting where it goes through an ugly phase. And I feel like most people, not all, but most people go through an ugly stage in their lives. On another new layer, I am adding in this very, very bright yellow, and I'm smudging it. I'm using the leatherwood because you know how I feel about that brush, and I don't want to keep repeating it. And you also know what I'm about to say on merging your layers. Next, I'm going to add a layer, add a clipping mask, going to one of the blues that I've already used in the background. I'm going to go for the hard airbrush. There we go. I'm going to take down the opacity a lot, and then I'm going to color it in on top of the tree log. And once this portion is done, I'm going to go into blending modes, and I'm going to select color, which is second from the bottom, I believe. Yeah. And then I'm going to go in and just smudge it so that way it's not, using the smudge tool, so that way it's not too obvious that I just straight up painted blue there. And once I am done fussing over this, I will add a new layer, and then we are going to work on some of the foreground. I end up choosing a bluish color, kind of like a periwinkle almost. I'm going to go into my drawing brushes, and I'm going to do the black burn again, and I am going to make cute little fungus mushrooms. And I could have put more effort and time into these. I was under a time crunch this morning when I was painting, so I had to be discerning with how much time and effort and focus I put into certain parts of this piece that I was working on. But once I get those down, yes, they're in a solid color, we'll work on that. I'm also putting down underneath them just some more detail to help draw the eye there. I want the eye to find the mushrooms, then find that center point of the tree log. I want the eye to take a journey. So I grab not all, but some of the little marks on the ground, and I just make them a little bit darker, so that way there's a sense of depth, so they're not all just one color. And to help with some of the intensity, I just smudge them just a touch with burnt tree, I believe it is. I put on alpha lock on those mushrooms so that I can start to paint in some of the colors. I go back to artistic, go back to leatherwood. And now I'm just tapping in the highlights, and I'll also be tapping in the shadows. And then also creating a significantly darker stem. I don't know what they're called. If someone is like a mushroom know-it-all, let me know. I want to know what is the stem of the mushroom called. I'm sure it has anatomy. Here we go. And I just make sure I'm on the hard brush so that way it's a little bit easier to stay on point. And then so they don't get completely lost, I do add some highlights along that stem. Awkward silence, because I've got nothing important to say at the moment. I do end up grabbing those with the selection tool, feathering it, and then just doing the slightest Gaussian blur. Just a little. We want it to be noticed, but we don't want it to take away from the actual focal point. On a new layer, I select one of the more vibrant blues that we've been using as a highlight. I take down the opacity on that hard airbrush, and I'm using it. I did alter that hard airbrush by making it so that the ends of it were tapered. You can do that under the settings for the brush. And if anybody needs help with that, just let me know. I'd be happy to show you. And I'm just making some grass that, stands out, draws attention, but again, does not distract from the main focus, which will be the tree log. Now I'm going in on a new layer with the Blackburn brush. And I'm just getting down some basic shapes. I'm not in love with the shapes. Honestly, I do wish that I had used maybe not a different brush. I do like this brush, but I just wish that I had maybe had a bit more time to work on this. But I was in a rush, like I said. So I just put down shapes and moved on quickly. I do try and, correct some of the shapes. You'll see that throughout this piece towards the end. If I had done it correctly in the first place, like if I had just taken the time, I would not have had to go back towards the end and correct some of the things that you're going to see. But, live and you learn on every piece you make. On an under layer, so underneath this, I would say foreground layer, I'm taking a dark blue similar to the background, and I am painting in more leaves because we're trying to create a sense of depth and shadow and light, and how, the background is getting further from us, so that means the colors will be more muted as well. No joke, guys. I do all of my filming right now on my phone, and I also do my audio on my phone, which means I am sitting inside my closet right now because I have small children who are screaming with joy, by the way, but they're screaming in the background. And the only place that I can get away with filming and doing the audio is inside my closet. So, with me in my closet while we go over how to make this piece comfortably as my feet fall asleep, of course. Right now, this back shadow, I'm just reshaping a little bit. It's also too dense, but I'll fix that by the end and I'll show you guys how I do it. Once I have them down, I use the Gaussian blur just a little, just enough to give perspective and put them a little bit back in the background where they belong, because they are not the stars of the show. I use the same methods I've been using to try and darken up the leaf there. I end up, doing the selection tool and then color adjustments. Right now, on a separate layer beneath both layers we've been working on, I believe, I'm going to go into the organics brush and grab those leaves, and I'm just going to tap them in to get some color and more texture into that background to really make us feel like we're sitting inside a forest. I end up needing to move that layer down below all of the other layers with the exception of the actual colored background, and then I slightly use the Gaussian blur. And now I'm just making sure that the colors all make sense, because this is definitely a more shadowed part and it was just too light in the front there. So now I'm grabbing the top and I'm just making sure the colors are just a little bit Just a little bit more violet. On a new layer, I'm going to grab one of the medium blues, and then I'm going to go to the drawing brush set, and I'm going to pick Blackburn again. And then I'm going to draw in some thin trees in the background. Just getting down the shapes. Remember that branches are thinner at the top and they get thicker towards the base or where they meet on a tree trunk. I didn't really get to put in that detail too much, but just a reminder, I resize and make them a little bit smaller and just appropriately placed composition-wise. Then I go into Gaussian blur again. I make sure it's blurred out in the background. Then I choose soft light as the blending mode, and then I go into rainforest. The rainforest brush is modified slightly, but all the modification is similar to the Aurora, just changing up the jitter and changing up the size of the brush, or spacing, sorry. And then once I have that down, I put it on the same blending mode as before. You can always play around with the blending modes to figure out what looks best for your piece, because they won't be identical no matter how hard we try. Yours will be yours and mine will be mine. And now I just put in on a new layer even smaller leaves, and I just wanted them to be sort of an additional highlight, but I don't want them to be too overpowering. Now I'm going to work on these leaves that I really hated. I'm going to go into the soft brush so that they're similar at least to some of the softer edges of the initial leaves that I put down there. And then I'm just going to autofill them. Make sure they're closed up. There you go. And then I'm just going to try and correct the shape of as many leaves as I feel is possible. Use the color fill again. This part's going to be a lot of repetition. It's this, oh, look at that. Okay, so I'm going to go drag and I'm going to slide. There we go. Perfect. This is just going to be a lot of repetitive motions. For the leaves, in case you didn't notice, I really didn't put in a whole lot of effort on drawing them, perfectly, especially because they're going to be in shadow and they're the least focused. I just didn't feel like it was worth the energy and time. So you can totally choose to render these more, but if we're already going to be blurring them a bit using Gaussian blur, and then they're also not the focal point, I just find it tends to I don't want to say a waste of time, but there are other ways to utilize your time. And I just felt like it was still in need of additional silhouettes, so I added those in. So now we're going to tackle that blue behind that I said was just like, it's too solid of a chunk of color. So we're going to actually go to erase, and we're going to go to the organics and then grab that brush that looks like a bunch of leaves and just tap it. And then we're going to grab that specifically because it is attached to a bunch of other things on that layer, and use Gaussian blur. So that way, now it looks like there's like leaves hanging out in the background with a variety of different colors, so it doesn't look too flat or too blocked in. I'm doing the same thing as I did above. I'm just creating a bit more leaves and diverseness down at the bottom here on the right hand corner. I still felt like it just needed just a little something to make it not so uniform, so I added that. And then, you guessed it, Gaussian blur. I'm so tired of that word. Those words. Okay, we are in the home stretch. Last 10 minutes, we can do this. So I go to the layer that is combined with the mushrooms. I grab the darkest color and then I go even darker, and I create an even darker shadow, which I could have done the first go, but I didn't, so now I am. And I'm not a huge fan of the mushrooms. I feel like I could have done more with them and also just made them blend in better. And I also might have used a different brush to make them. I don't like that the edge of them is so stark, but it's fine. So now I'm just tapping in some darker colors because I just felt like they were starting to blend into the background rather than stand out. And I do want them to stand out a little. I don't want them to take the show, but I do want them to be a side character, you know? And now we're about to get into the fun part. So we're going to go into luminance on a new layer, of course, and we're going to tap in some like fairy lights or fireflies or magic. I don't know. Call it what you will. Whimsical elements. Now, I wanted the background to have a glow, so I just duplicated the layer that we're on, and then I put alpha lock on. I filled it with the bright color that we're using for highlights, and then I took it off alpha lock, and now I am smudging and erasing any excess away that doesn't belong. We don't want the glow to be perfect. It will look unnatural, because even with glowing, there would be places where the glowing element of light would hit like harder and have more vibrancy and again get lost in shadow. On some of the more noticeable, like the larger mushrooms, I do end up smudging the edges just to soften them a bit, because I felt like the edges were just a little too pronounced and I wanted to change that. So now I pick a tennis ball green yellowish color using luminance brushes again, that one light brush, and I'm just creating as much spontaneity in my light tapping, if you will. And once I'm done with this, I do end up duplicating that layer, using Gaussian blur. Then I put on the alpha lock. I change the color to something a bit brighter, like closer to white. Then I fill the layer. Then I take off I don't take off the alpha lock. I combine the layers first, and then I take off the alpha lock. And now I'm using the bright minty teal color down in the areas where I feel like the color would be, slightly changed. I do put that layer up above because I wanted to add some more colors and I wanted them to be in front of all of the leaves, like the foreground as well as the background. I'm so excited, guys. We're about to get to the part in the video where I show you the places that I really messed up, and I get to show you how I fixed it. And even with that, I could have done so much more for this piece. But I, again, was on a time crunch. So maybe I'll finish this piece another day and show you guys like what I would do in addition to, take it up to the next level. And on a new layer, I'm going into the airbrush and I'm painting on some more of that vibrant blue color where I think it would hit on the underside of the tree log, and I'm just blending it in. I'm not putting it everywhere. I'm just really focused on the underside where that backlighting would be. And now I'm going to choose the tennis ball green again. I'm going to go back to very small size for the leatherwood, and I'm just going to tap in some more vibrancy, because if we have like these fairy lights casting light down on the moss would be a bit brighter. So that's why I did that. I felt like it was missing something, so I, next to the bottom layer, I used leather wood at a really large size to create almost like water down behind the mushrooms. And then I used instead of Gaussian blur, I used motion blur. Then on top of that, in a new layer, I chose a really light blue. And then I also did a little bit of like yellow and greens because, water picks up and reflects what's around it. And I wanted that to be in the water. And then because of it being reflected in the water, I also wanted it to be reflected in the trees. So I just felt like it was a missing element that really needed to be put in. So I used the Aurora brush. I lighten it up and adjust the color a bit. Use the Gaussian blur. All the tools we've been using this entire video. And I do it just a little bit more, just to make sure it really comes through. And you guessed it, more Gaussian blur. And I just feel like it looks like it comes so much more together now because those colors, like we're getting that green, not just on the tree log, but also in the water and in the trees, like as a light that's bouncing off the leaves. So, and then I'm using a smudge to help, just move them around a bit. And I just use the Aurora brush again because it holds the shape of the leaves. I do feel like it needed a little bit more, so I did add a bit more yellow and use the motion blur again on that water. And I bring it up a few layers just because I felt like some of my other layers were really diffusing it and I wanted it to come through as much as possible. And then, of course, we needed to add some more magical lighting above it. And here's the finished product. Now, here's where the fun part gets, guys. I exported it as a JPEG. And I saw where the colors were deceiving me. And that's one of the areas. So here's a picture. Look at that. Nope. So I go back in. I go to the layer with the mushroom. It's the foreground essentially. And then I grab the area. And then I use the feather. And I take the brightness down. Essentially, I'm creating more shadow. So now it's black versus that very dark green. Now, right above that layer, I am going to add some leaves using Aurora, and I want them fairly large. And I just am trying to get rid of that really awkward stark line right there. And then we're going to use the blur it. And then we're going to go into the layer where the leaves are the foreground. And then I'm going to trace along the areas that I would like to see darkened. I'm going to make sure I tap so it's complete. There we go. I'm going to hit invert because I want it to touch just those areas, not the other way around. Then I'm going to use feather and I'm going to use the adjustments on the color, take the brightness down so it's more black. And now there's like a gradient. So that part is now fixed, mostly. So now I'm going to select the tree log. I'm going to circle the middle area, which is the focal area. I'm going to make sure it's selected, invert, because I want to get the edges, like the opposite sides of that, selected, and I'm going to darken it. Okay, and now I'm just going to use the smudge tool and the leather wood to just bring that shadow out a bit so it's not so stark. I'm going to select again. I'm also going to, there we go, invert, feather, and then I'm going to use Gaussian blur. So that way it blurs the outer edges of the log, but it still keeps the center in focus. So there you go. It's more blurred on the outside now. And then I'm going to pick the underside and I'm going to feather. I'm going to Gaussian blur that as well. Because we really want the upper side of that tree, the upper side with the moss, to be in focus the most. Only a little bit here, like 3%. Okay, so for now, we're going to call that good. I'm definitely going to make a follow-up tutorial on how to enhance this piece because I like it, but it could be pushed further. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.